So Kate, you are an actor's director because you yourself are an actor. But on the flip side of that, a lot of actors who turn to directing their own movies do so because they're often frustrated with the lack of nuanced roles they crave. So how did working with your husband gift yourself a role to do something you've never been able to do before in other projects?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say I would say that mostly I took this role because I was there already and I was a cheap actor to have on set. So well, I was absolutely thrilled to be working on such an incredible character that Kevin created. I definitely am very aware of the limitations that I created for myself as a first-time feature director and an actor. And so I don't know necessarily that I would do that for myself again. But I think it was a really cool learning experience for me as far as getting to have of leaving my ego aside as far as myself as an actor and editing things based upon what was best rather than what made me as an actor look the best. Yeah, it was a really interesting experience for sure.
And on that note, I mean, walk me through the balancing act you played with your cinematographer and department heads and the challenges that came with not only directing yourself, and rushing to the back to watch playback, but also, directing the rest of the cast.
Yeah, so yeah, there was very little playback watching for me because we shot this whole feature in 15 days and we just didn't have the time to be, we had packed days and we didn't have the time to be watching playback. So I was very lucky in that I was working with a team of people we've worked with before. Scott had been on the short. Obviously, I'm married to Kevin, and so we'd worked together in quite a few things. It was absolutely necessary to surround myself with people I trusted and with people who are way smarter than me so that I could look to them and say, was that, are we good? And know that when they say yes, that they're looking at it through my eyes and I can trust them and I can trust their taste. So that was a huge thing, is creating a team that could be self-sufficient, so that I could kind of wear both of those hats and trust the team that was around me. Yeah, so that was a huge thing for sure.
And Kevin, in the writing stage, I mean, obviously this was adapted from short as a proof of concept for this feature. So, but in the writing stages, Illinois is a prominent place, at least for Kate, and even for Scott, who grew up in Illinois. So, how did you work with Kate to make this town in Illinois its own character that torments and makes Louie reconcile his exploitative behavior?
Yeah, when we did this short, being from Northern California, it feels a lot like that town. There were like the dirt track, and a lot of these locations were places that I grew up in. So our like philosophy as indie filmmakers is finding production value. It's one of our philosophies anyway. And so finding ways that we can make it seem more expensive and interesting, and not, instead of just setting scenes and just random places. So in writing it for Northern California, yet adapting it for Illinois because our financiers and production company, Chicago Media Angels, wanted us to adapt it for Illinois. It was a coming home story for me, but then became one for Kate, which was appropriate and amazing. But also, it's nice being the writer and the actor being there because I can write on the fly. So when we do find stuff that increases production value, for instance, the bus in the cornfield, Kate was scouting. She was scouting location for the orchard that we were going to drive this ATV through, and she found this, and she was like, "Do we have to change
I just called
something?
and was like, change the scene because we're doing something on there.
This
Like,
is super cool. We have to have something here." And it was like, where it would. I had written it for this really interesting lagoon, like in the center of town where I grew up, and we were like, well, this fits
way
way
better.
cooler. So let's do
Yeah.
that. And then it was changing the dialogue to fit that it's a school bus, and why is it there?
Just
And
being flexible, I
yeah,
think, is a huge part of indie filmmaking, is like recognizing what are the things that make this film stand out and how you can facilitate getting those things. And a lot of times it is just being flexible about being, open to changes and open to, what you can get for free or for cheap.
right.
No, thank you. And Scott, I mean, like Kate, you grew up outside of Chicago. So how did filming on location resonate with you as someone whose new Hollywood life conflicts measurably with your old town life?
Yeah, well, I was born in Illinois, but I only lived there for about 5 years. I kind of moved around a lot after that. And I was saying earlier, like, my hometown is it's sort of nebulous because I moved here when I moved to LA when I was like 18, so I don't really know like what my hometown is. So I don't know how to like to use that because like I mean, Kevin, I think you had said earlier, like I don't have like a reaction when I go home. There's not like oh, you're out there in Hollywood doing stuff. No one seems to care. You know what I mean? So I don't have that like comparison to make. Um, but and where we were filming in Illinois too is also so different than where I lived. I lived in like Carroll Stream, which is a suburb of Chicago, and where we were in DeKalb, Illinois was like cornfields and farms and distance.
I also feel like Scott, like you having that perspective was really great because I think Louie has homogenized his personality and background where he's
Yeah.
not from anywhere and kind of while feeling that he maintains a grip and authority on where he's from. So he's
Mhm.
living this double life in a way, or feels like he can chameleon back, but it's like he can't. He's forgotten.
Also,
He's
yeah,
lost
the
touch with
lack
that.
of belonging generally is
Yeah.
like, yeah, a huge part of this too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I think
it
that
all
really
works.
played for Louis really well.
I mean, on that note, I mean, again, this movie is, I'm sure, changed quite a bit since of the short. So, I mean, walk me through maybe the conversations that you had, Scott, with Kate and Kevin about your own characters' development from the short and into this feature.
Yeah, there was so much more, because I was saying earlier that the short film is really like the first 20 pages of the feature, obviously with some changes, but like there's a lot more to the feature with the father and the more mental health aspect. Um, but I think we had a really good basis for who Louis was when we did the short film, and we just really expanded on that. And the great thing is it's very collaborative. The fact that the three of us were not only in the movie, but we were also, part of like making this thing come to life is that we all got to sort of talk to each other on set and really, come to an agreement about who Louis is, who Lainey, who Travis, and obviously the script was great, so that made it very easy. But yeah, it was a big collaborative effort from the three of us.
Yeah, Kevin, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, the short Dandelion has its own kind of Easter egg, into this as it's as a descriptor for Lainey's character. So, I mean, are there any other, things that you used from that short to adapt it into this feature, and especially when it came to the characters' dynamics?
Yeah, a few shots actually make it
Mhm.
in there as well that we just used, which are shots of my hometown, which was really cool. Easter egg for me, or at least for them to watch too. But I think the short we had to change quite a bit in regards to like there are stories that just work in that capacity, this small like kind of construct, and then when you go to a feature there are certain elements of story that are just you can't have play out the same way for 90 pages, so there was this for instance, the earringing stuff wasn't necessarily an earring that we had in the short. It was a voiceover, kind of like a la like Taxi Driver, but you thought he was narrating what he was seeing, but really he was hearing the echoes of his books repeated back to him, so that when he was confronted with certain things where he was changing, his point of view was changing, he was still hearing how he had written about Lainey and all that. So that stuff had to change because in writing a feature and us doing her first feature, that voiceover is so divisive. And for that kind of device to keep you going the whole way, it just seems very tenuous. So developing this earring thing that we can kind of bounce in and bounce out of, get away from for the most part of the movie, and just have it come up as it's
like
crescendoing.
Artistically sustainable.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. You know, this is a very ambitious movie for our budget and our 15-day shoot. So you don't want to develop something as a writer that you think is cool but is risky to pay off. Like, how about we just focus on what's right in front of us and use that component in the third act and just sprinkle it throughout, you know. So that was something that we
No, definitely. And I have a more difficult question for you, Kate. I mean, there are three different versions of any movie that you do. The idea that you have, or the one that you imagine in development and pre-production, the one that you get in, you know, in production, and the one that you get in the final edit. And given that, you know, this had taken 3 years to make and 15 days to shoot, and you wrapped in August of 2022 and premiered recently or earlier this year at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, can you walk me through how much this film have changed, either subtly or massively, from the first draft to the final cut? And what did you have to compromise on without really us at the same time not compromising the integrity of the script?
Yeah, that's a great question. You are so right. It is a completely different experience, what you start with, what you shoot, and what you end up with. And the emotional acceptance of that is a real difficult thing as an artist, but obviously it's completely necessary to get good at that. I think the thing that we lacked with our time constraints were a lot of like connective tissue things. We didn't get a lot of time to shoot like transitional vistas, or to, you know, so we didn't have a budget for reshoots, and we didn't have a budget for stock footage. So it was really about making the most cohesive, fleshed out film we could with what we got within those 15 days. And a lot of that was achieved. You know, if there was a moment, say in the film, that I felt like we needed a few more beats of tension, but we just didn't have that footage, then I would go through with my sound team, I would go through with my composer, I would go through with my coloring team, and I would say, we need to build tension in another way for this moment. So whether that is a spike in the score, whether that is a slight color shift into something that maybe feels a little more bleak or a little bit more saturated in an uncomfortable way, or if we're going to use this earring in a very more, you know, much more intense way here, I found myself needing to accomplish those kind of tonal and thematic shifts using the other elements that I had at my disposal at that point. So I think that what's beautiful about having constraints is that you are so much more creative with constraints. Having the footage that I had to think outside the box in other ways, and the score was something different than it was maybe going to be, or the color was something different than it was going to be. But for me, like, I love that challenge, and I do think it leads to a much more interesting product when you are up against it like that. So yeah, I think it was a very interesting, and it was a great learning experience to just say, like, what kind of artist am I on the fly now? Like, how do we create this thing and make the best movie that we have, not the movie we wanted, the movie we have. And I'm happy with what we got.
I mean, diamonds are made under pressure, so I completely get that. And this is an absolute gem.
We're all diamonds over.
Definitely. Just a few more questions for you. Kevin, actually, given that you know yourself and your wife and both of your acting abilities so well, was it easier to lean into something that you're used to or into something more difficult? Like, for example, you write your wife kissing somebody else, you know, I mean, you play into that. Some people it would be, you know, that's a kink for some people. What was that like for you?
Let's get into it.
I was in the back seat. No, I think it's so great to be able to have the actors already cast, you know, to write towards Scott and Kate. Like, that was the whole conceit of this. And also Dan Johnson playing Steve and Joseph Betta playing JJ. Like, we knew these people, we knew their strengths as actors, and we wanted to highlight them. So everyone kind of, like Scott's talked about, like there's been a lot of development together with that character, not necessarily like massive sit downs and stuff, but I think even just hanging out and working together, and like we've gotten to know each other even better. So I know what he wants to do and the kind of character maybe he wants to play, and things that I know that he does that make me laugh. So throwing those things at him, or like I think was great for everybody to do. So yeah, I think it was very much like, it's kind of like they say with writing, like writing a screenplay, that you want to cast actors already, like so people will cast like just to inform the voice, like a Robert De Niro or something, where you're like, okay, cool, I can see them playing this part, even though they won't. But like, it was really the constraints of knowing exactly who we wanted for these things. They were good constraints, so I could bend the voices towards my friends, so and wife. So it was great.
For Scott, I mean, a lot of what we know about your character isn't particularly shown, but told through those that inhabit this small town. But there's one moment in particular that stuck me in the middle of the movie where we kind of see it for ourselves, just how you know pretentious your character is. At least one that I can recall, and it's when Louie's talking to Steve, and Steve recounts his brother Travis's off-screen tragedy, and your character kind of gleams with mischief before remembering to come back down to earth. And it's kind of like he's considering using this as fodder for the next book. So walk me through the conversations you had with Kate regarding your own, actor's intuition, and the character feedback you had on Louie's motives and backstory in moments like that where we see past Louie and present Louie converge.
It's a great question. So wait, which part are you exactly talking about? You said Steve, his brother. Are you talking about his family, his family's accident? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think the whole trip, this is part of him gleaning more information for a future book, right? I mean, that's kind of what he's doing, sort of mischievously, is trying to get more information for, another opportunity to write about that hometown. And that's his whole career. I mean, Kate, did we ever talk about, like the motivation for that?
I don't think so. I think we talked a little bit about there's so much of it that's there in the writing, but then there's
Right.
those little moments. I think that moment specifically for me read that he was that was such a nice compliment that he received, that oh my gosh, it's like my family comes to life again. That's so amazing. And then Steve is so hurt, and he has to remind himself, like, oh right, sorry, this is your real life.
So
Sorry.
hard.
And it's
So
like
hard.
it just shows he's so self-focused. But I
Yeah.
also think, and I think we might have talked about this a little bit, like you talk about in a very like actory way, you talk about the actor's moment before. And like for me, the moment before he got to the town, like the moment before the movie starts, he is going through a serious like problem with writer's block. I think he feels like he's out of ideas. He doesn't know how to end the series. He's got the movie people breathing down his neck about it. And I think that a huge thing that pushes him into the town is, I got to get more material. Like I don't have anything left. I've got, I've now used up, and I don't live there anymore. I've used up all of my stories, all of my friends' stories. So I do think it's him collecting, he is there to collect some bodies, to get some skeletons out of some closets, which, is its own, kind of mischievous thing for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, one more question. So how did directing and producing content for Funny or Die and some of your own projects give you the confidence and toolkit to direct your first feature? And name some of the elements of directing a feature that you couldn't quite, prepare for or anticipate with a short, and what are some of the visual references that you, or the comps that you used for this?
Yeah. So, I would say being an actor was probably the thing that, and being on a lot of different sets is the thing that prepared me the most for being a director, because I knew what I didn't want to do and I didn't want to be. And I knew the kind of environment that I wanted to create and I wanted to avoid. So for me, indie film is hard to make. It's long hours. It's uncomfortable. The food sucks. It is a tough, it's a tough situation to be in for an entire month. the only way to make it tolerable and appealing is to make it fun, and to create a to create a workplace environment and a workplace culture that is about creativity and about support and respect and excitement over creating something together. So that to me is like my mission when I'm directing something. And I think it really helps to create, I don't think that people can be, I think that like pressure is the enemy of creativity, and that type of, creating an environment that feels loving and that feels like you can be vulnerable enough to be creative, it leads to everyone around you doing their jobs really well. And so now I just finished my second feature on Friday, and having created that world again and that environment again, I feel even more strongly that it is important to allow for people around you to be vulnerable and creative and to enjoy themselves. So that's a huge part of it. And then there was another part to your question. The visual, the comps. Yeah. I've said it a million times today, but I am completely derivative as a director. I copy. I consume a lot of films. I mean,
It's
when
called inspiration, Kate. It's inspiration.
Yeah, inspiration. Sure. Yeah, I'll give it where it's due, but
Yeah.
when we're not working actively on set, we're watching a film a night.
Yeah.
And I am a lot of rewatching. I'm a huge fan of Sean Baker. I'm a huge fan of Jeff Nichols. I steal from them constantly. I visually, I come up, if I'm prepping for a film, and I do a lot of pre-production, and if I'm prepping for a film, I will make a list of maybe 20 films that are all comped either visually, tonally, from a sound perspective, a color perspective, maybe even just that they share the same aspect ratio that I'm going to use.
Mm-hmm.
But I will watch them all, and I will pull images, and I will pull ideas, and I'll combine genres and all of that. So I tend to we were plugging this earlier, like we're gonna get a sponsorship from them, which we aren't, but it's called Shot Deck. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a really great website where you can pull any sort of still, and I'll use that a lot when it comes to needing a tense moment, but I'm just not sure about the composition of the frame, and I need a little help, and I'll go on there and look through thousands of screen, film grabs of films. And I love to steal. It's my favorite thing to do. Love it.
Well, thank you so much, all of you for sticking around, and I hope you you have a great press run, and that this movie, has the audience it deserves. So thank you all.